In my previous video, I discussed how you AC charge an electric car. I also mentioned how simple it was to actually set up, how cost effective it is, and how it's actually less stressful on your battery pack, therefore prolonging its battery life. However, there are some instances when that's actually not fast enough because while AC charging is great, it does have its limitations in the fact that, okay, if you're in a rush or if you're in a bit of a pinch, yeah, it's not particularly that fast. So what if you're on a road trip, for example, or maybe you're in town and you've completely forgotten to charge your car or whatever, and oh crap, I'm in a pinch. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. That, or what if AC charging literally is not an option for you because either there's no public spots in your area or you can't do it from home or such and such like that? Well, then it's time to talk about the other option and also explain why we have this option, because AC charging has its limitations. However, despite that AC charging does have its limitations, so does DC charging. So in today's video, let's discuss how DC charging works, as well as get into a few etiquette items. All right, cue the intro. First things first, actually before we get started, if you hadn't watched my AC charging video, you might want to watch that. Link is in the description. It'll be easier if you happen to have that knowledge in that video first before you start watching this video. Just a suggestion. All right, let's discuss DC charging. So if AC charging is so great, it's simple, it's cost effective, it's easy to set up, it's easier to maintain, such and such like that. If that's so great, then why do we need DC charging? So here's the question that a lot of people ask. Why is AC charging so slow compared to DC charging? It's because due to the way that AC charging is set up compared to DC, there's limitations involved with the actual charging hardware. When you're AC charging the car, the charging hardware, aka the converter, the AC to DC converter, that's actually located in the car, hence why it's called AC charging. You're plugging in a cable, and that cable is delivering AC power to the car, not DC. DC charging, the charger is outside the car, and you're plugging that cable from the converter into the car, giving it direct current. That is the difference between AC and DC charging. AC charging, the converter's in the car, DC it's out of it. So if you show up at a DC charging station, well, doesn't that mean the converter on the inside and the outside? Isn't that a bit redundant per se? Well, here's actually why there's a converter on the outside. Why do we have these two differences as of whether or not the converter is in the vehicle or if it's outside the vehicle? Why do we have these differences? It's actually because both offer their own advantages. With AC charging, the converter being in the car, it knows the battery best. Therefore, all you have to do is provide it power and it does all the work to charge the battery the way the battery likes it. However, why is that a bit of a disadvantage? It's because due to the fact that this charger has to be in the car somewhere, that means it can only be so big, therefore also so powerful. That's why AC charging is much slower. In theory, if the car actually had enough room to fit a big converter that can, say, power the battery at like 250 kilowatts, for example, that's not possible, by the way. There's no way that's possible. If it could do that, then sure, you could still AC charge the car if it had, say, a big enough converter to charge it at that high of a speed. But because we're stepping out of reality to make that happen, it's a bit obvious why we don't have that setup. And that's why we have the DC situation. All right, so we're already talking about how it's set up right now. So let's actually discuss more about how the DC stations are set up. At a DC charging station, also quite often referred to as a DC fast charging station, and it's because, yeah, it's usually faster than AC. Not all the time. I'm looking at you, Electrify America, and ChargePoint, and EVgo, and basically every other CCS charger. But anywho, let's talk about the setup. The way it works is, well, you have the grid, obviously, and then you have power coming from the grid. It's still in AC form, by the way, because you get AC power directly from the grid. That's what they use, AC power. You get AC power from the grid to a transformer where it converts it to the voltages and amperages that the chargers much prefer, because typically what's in the grid is a much higher power that would probably blow the chargers if that's what you directly connected them with. Then you still have AC power flowing from the transformer to the actual charging hardware itself, where it gets converted from AC to DC power. It then flows from the converters to the dispensers, which is what you're typically used to seeing at all of these charging sites. Like, for example, the Tesla supercharging stall. This is a dispenser, not the actual charger. The charging hardware is somewhere else. And then it flows from the dispenser directly to the battery pack. Yeah, it's actually passing the onboard charger that the vehicle has because, well, you don't need it. The car is getting DC power. There's no need to convert it. So that's how it's set up. setup. Now, it's great that this setup does allow much faster charging speeds than what you can get at home or your office or who knows where those AC chargers are located at. Yeah, while it is great that you can get much faster speeds due to the layout of this setup, it does have some disadvantages. The thing with AC charging is it's very simple in terms of communications, and this is the biggest problem that a lot of people are having at these DC stations. With AC charger, the box outside of the car, the EVSE, is pretty dumb actually. All it has is enough smarts to tell the car, hey, you can only pull this many amps, and it also has safety elements in it. That's basically what the EVSE is. It's a stupid box that just tells the car, hey, don't pull more than this many amps. The car does the rest of the work and figures everything else out. However, because the charger is located outside of the car, communications become much more critical. There's much more communications that have to go on because the car's not handling the charging anymore. The charger is outside the car. And this is the failure point of a lot of charging stations out there. Now, a lot of Electrify America stations, for example, oftentimes those sites are down due to just general hardware fails, like cable cooling, for example. Electrify America has a lot of hardware issues. Now, despite that I'm about to explain the drawbacks with doing this, I want to let you know that Tesla's actually figured it out. I don't know why, but somehow they are literally the only charging company here in North America that's figured out how to DC fast charge a car. And typically when there's issues with it, it's either due to thermal limitations, which you can't ignore those. Even CCS stations in Europe have thermal limitations as well. But as long as you don't have thermal limitations, which can happen to any charger actually, it works literally just fine. It follows the vehicle's charging curve. It rarely ever delivers less. And if it does deliver less, then there's actually a hardware issue, not an actual communication issue. However, at basically every other CCS station here in North America, this is a problem. I don't understand why, but for some reason, nobody can figure out how to communicate with the cars. And because of that, it results into very bad charging sessions. How bad can these sessions be? Well, there's two different ways of it being bad. One is worse than the other. Now, you might think this is worse at first, and it's because this is where the car is charging slower, but basically what's going on is due to miscommunications or whatever, the charger is not following the vehicle's charging curve. And the car tells the charger, hey, this is how much you should give me. And the charger knows. If the charger can't output as much as the car is actually asking for, then it simply output what it can. So getting into explaining why the cars will often charge slower isn't exactly easy to explain because there's many different factors that could actually cause it to charge slower in the first place. Be it battery temperature, cable temperature, things like that. Those will often cause it to charge slower. So oftentimes we can't tell if it's that. Though if you can tell whether or not the battery's hot or not, or if the cable's hot or not, if you can tell that the battery is at its temperature that it wants to be at, and the cable is actually fairly cool and it's still charging slower, then that's a problem. It just drives me nuts. There's so many issues in terms of communications between the dispenser and the car. There's so many communication issues. Quite often the issue is it's usually slower. However, with Electrify America's latest hardware, and this is actually very concerning because for some reason EA hasn't completely figured out how to communicate with the car, they're delivering too much power to the car now. And that is bad. The reason why cars have their charging curves, even as the battery pack gets to a higher state of charge, it's actually because the fuller the battery gets, the harder it is to shove electrons in it. And so if you try to force them, that's when bad things happen. Like, I don't know, things heating up per se, and then we get a little explosive. Yeah, EA has not figured out how to charge a car, and it is embarrassing that they haven't figured out to do it. I don't know if it's because of CCS. I've already ranted on CCS in a previous video. You can go ahead and check out that. I don't know if it's CCS. I don't know if it's the protocols that they're using to communicate. But what I can confirm is for some odd reason, and I don't even understand why it's this bad, they can't figure out how to communicate with the car and charge it. Most of the time when there's charging issues, it ends up being slower. If you have to have something go wrong where it's not following the charging curve, I'd rather it charge slower than charge faster. Because if it does charge faster, that is bad for the battery pack. We have charging curves for a reason. And that's quite often why the DC charging charging experience is very, very frustrating to a lot of CCS owners. Tesla, they got it completely figured out. I mean, completely figured out. And pretty much most of the time, if there's an issue, it's actually a hardware issue, not a communications issue. And at least from what I've seen in terms of watching so many Tesla road trip videos, I've been watching so much out of spec motoring, as well as various other YouTubers road tripping Teslas. Tesla's got it completely figured out. Pretty much whenever there's an issue, it's actually a hardware issue and not a communications issue. However, at the CCS stations, there's so many communications issues all the time, be it the charging station doesn't want to engage even though it's ready to go, or they fault out mid-session because, oops, whoa, we can't agree on something all of a sudden. It's bonkers. I can't believe that EA makes it look so hard. It's not that hard. And you know what? Free suggestion, Electrify America? I think you need to change up your protocols. I don't think this is working anymore. Whatever protocol you're using to communicate with the cars, I think you need to change it, because clearly what you're using right now is not working. And then aside from, yeah, the communications part being the weakest link in terms of DC charging in general, if you can't get the communications right, then there's a lot that can go wrong in DC charging the car, which is why AC charging is actually usually considered more reliable, and it's much better on your battery. So now that you know how DC charging works, as well as the drawbacks, or the biggest drawback, and why it's such a problem, especially here in North America, I now want to talk about charging station etiquette. Why? Because it's actually a bit of a problem. Now, I'm not pinpointing the blame on everybody. In fact, most of the time when these etiquette issues happen, it's not even their fault. They don't even know this stuff. They're brand new Joe Schmoes who just got an EV because, oh, these cars are not as bad as what everyone makes them out to be. So because of that, I actually wanted to discuss proper charging etiquette before we finish the video. Because there's two different networks here in North America, I'm going to cover both the issues of the CCS charging network, because they have their own separate issues, and the Tesla network, because believe it or not, there are some etiquette issues at some of Tesla's supercharging stations. Not all, but some. Anywho, without further ado, I'm going to start with the Tesla supercharger network, because that's my favorite network. It's the network that actually works the best, and Electrify America should be taking a crap ton of notes from Tesla. So the way Tesla actually differs in terms of handling their charging stalls compared to the other CCS network, while the CCS network likes to have pretty much one cabinet per dispenser, Tesla actually pairs multiple dispensers up with a single cabinet, which means the dispensers are sharing power from a cabinet. Now, at Tesla's latest V3 supercharging stations, the cabinet is actually so powerful that it can power 4 of those stalls at maximum speed. So because of that, it actually is not an issue, even though those dispensers are still sharing a cabinet. However, the problem is at V2s, where the etiquette issue comes into play. As you guessed, at a V2 station, dispensers are still paired up with a cabinet, but in this case, it's 2 dispensers per cabinet. Okay, so if Tesla has figured out, okay, they can pair up 4 dispensers for a cabinet at a V3 station, what's the issue with 2 dispensers at a V2? The actual problem is the actual cabinet itself. The cabinet is limited to 150 kilowatts output. So that means not only are V2 stations capped at 150 kilowatts max if you were there by yourself per se, but if you had somebody else using the other dispenser that's sharing the same cabinet with you, you're actually getting half of that speed. You're not getting 150 kilowatts, you're getting 70. If you actually do a direct calculation, it's supposed to be 75 kilowatts, but I believe due to some limitations and power splitting, it shrinks to 72 kilowatts per vehicle. But 72, 75, close enough. What's the difference? But yeah, that's a really big difference from 150 kilowatts, which means you're charging a lot slower if you're sharing cabinets with someone else. So when you pull up to a V2, and here's a simple way to tell if it's a V3 or a V2 station. First way that's not so obvious, a V2 stall, which this might seem weird, but believe it or not, the V2, the older charging stalls, they actually use a thicker charging cable. So if the cable on the stall is thicker, it's a V2. If it's thinner, it's a V3. If it's a V3, you ain't got anything to worry about. Just pick a stall and charge. But the other method that I actually find easier to tell the difference between a V2 and a V3 station, the V2s have a a silver ring at the base of the handle where the cable comes into. The V3s, on the other hand, they don't have that. It's actually a black ring. So you need a quick way to tell if it's a V2 or a V3. Look for the silver ring. If it's a silver ring, it's a V2. If it has no silver ring, it's a V3. So what do you do if you happen to approach a V2 station with the silver ring on the handle? It pretty much means do not pick a dispenser that shares a cabinet with someone else who's charging. Why? Because, well, one, then you won't get great speeds. Anyways, you're only getting 72 kilowatts, so that doesn't even benefit you. But also, it doesn't benefit the other driver who's already trying to charge. Okay, this does become an issue when the station is already half full. And at that point, you're pretty much going to be stuck charging with someone else and robbing their speeds. But if you end up in a situation like this, work with the other people at the charging station. Actually ask them, hey, what state of charge are you guys at? And the reason why this is important, because remember how I mentioned vehicles have a charging curve, which means they can only take so much at a given state of charge. The higher state of charge you're at, the less you need faster charging speeds. So because of that, if you end up in that situation, ask the people around you, hey, who's got the highest state of charge? Now, okay, the person who's got the highest state of charge might get annoyed that, yeah, you gotta charge with them, but hey, they're already at a high state of charge, which means they're gonna be leaving soon anyways. So if it does come down to that, ask the people around you, hey, who's got the highest state of charge? Because A, that means they're gonna leave first, and B, whoever has the highest state of charge, they're probably just about ready to leave. Now, unless everyone just happens to flood in all at once and pretty much plumb out of luck at that point. But those are some tips I have to offer. Do not share a cabinet with another driver, and the stalls are labeled, so that way you know which stalls are paired with the same cabinet. So yeah, don't share a cabinet with anyone unless you're absolutely forced to. And when you are forced to share it with someone, ask the drivers around you and say, hey, what state of charge are you guys are at? So that way you pull into the cabinet with the driver who's just about to leave anyways and probably is already charging at slower speeds anyways. And then when that driver leaves, hey, you're back up to 150. Well, assuming that your charging curve doesn't derate from 150 at that point. And again, V3 stations, they do not have this issue at all. Feel free to pick any cabinet you want, unless it's a broken cabinet. Don't pick the broken cabinet, because then you can't charge. Okay, well, I could say one thing. If there happens to be a lineup when the stations are full, because this has unfortunately started happening, there are times when superchargers actually become full. If that does happen, please try to work with each other. Don't try to steal any spots. Yes, you might be in a rush, but hey, the reason why a lot of people go to superchargers is because they are also in a rush to get charged. This is assuming that they're also charging from home, which they should be doing. So yeah, despite that you might be in a rush, every other driver around you that is also waiting for a dispenser to open up, they're also in a rush too. Don't be a jerk, wait your turn. So that's covering Tesla's supercharger etiquette. We're now going to talk about the CCS etiquette, because this is actually way different compared to the supercharger network. Tesla likes to pair dispensers up with their cabinets, and that's why their etiquette is actually way different from CCS. However, CCS, pretty much every dispenser actually gets their own cabinet, and the dispensers that do share cabinets, the cabinets are usually powerful enough to actually power both cars at max speeds, just like Tesla V3 cabinets are able to power her 4 Teslas at max speeds. But what's different about the CCS network? Not every dispenser puts out the same power. At a Tesla supercharging station, at a V3, maximum you get is 250 kilowatts, and this is basically the entire site, unless it happens to be an old site that happens to upgrade but wants to keep those old stalls around, which isn't that common. Most supercharging sites have either all 100% V2s or 100% V3s. There's not that many out there that have both on the same lot. That and the majority of Tesla share the exact same charging curve, so that's why they do not have what I'm about to discuss with the CCS network. So because basically every other automaker decided to not use the NACS connector, which kind of sucks, but also use different battery architectures, which hey, that makes sense. That means every vehicle has their own different charging curve, but also different top charging speed. For example, the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and Kia EV6, those can charge up to around 230 kilowatts. The Porsche Taycan can do 270. In fact, the Lucid Air and the GMC Hummer EV, what a stupid electric car. But that and the Lucid Air, they can charge up to 350 kilowatts, which is crazy. Meanwhile, there are some other cars like the Volkswagen ID4 that can only charge at a maximum speed of around 140, 150, somewhere there. Same with the Audi e-tron. And then you also have the Chevy Bolt. There are many people that hate owners who have a Chevy Bolt because of this etiquette problem that they have. So if you own a Chevy Bolt, listen up and listen close. At a lot of Electrify America stations. Some have a situation where every cabinet produces same power no matter what. Be it either all 150, all 350, some are like that. But the majority of them out there, they're not. Most Electrify America stations, and I'm saying Electrify America because that's the largest CCS network here in the United States, which sucks because knowing how bad they are at charging vehicles, unfortunately, they're the largest and the most dependable compared to everyone else. Anyway, most Electrify America sites, there's typically 4 stalls per site, which is kind of small. You should be putting more than 4 stalls in at all of your locations. That's kind of small. But anywho, those 4 stalls, half of them, 2 of them, however you want to look at it, half of them are usually 350s and the other half are 150s. Here's where the problem comes in. We've got some cars that are capable of charging faster than 150. Rivian R1T, Hyundai Ioniq 5, Porsche Taycan, Lucid Air. There's so many EVs that are capable of charging at faster than 150 kilowatt speeds. And because of that, they want to use the 350s. However, there's an etiquette problem, which is kind of annoying to those drivers, where a Volkswagen ID4 or an Audi e-tron, or the biggest one that drives most people nuts, a Chevy Bolt, especially the Chevy Bolt. The ID4 and the e-tron can charge at like 150. The Bolt does 50 kilowatts. It's ridiculously slow how fast that thing DC charges. And when those vehicles that can't even take advantage of the 350 clog up those 350s, it drives those who can take advantage of the 350s nuts. Now be advised, when this happens, most of the time, this is not intentional. Those Ford Mach-E owners and ID4s and Bolt owners, they have no idea what any of these numbers mean, nor do they fully understand the peak speed that their car will get. So because of that, most of the time, they don't know any better. So don't be rude about it. But if you do happen to get in that situation, politely explain to them they can't take advantage of the 350s and they should be charging on the 150s. Why? Due to the fact that most stations only have 4 sites, which is embarrassingly low compared to Tesla superchargers. Most superchargers that are being deployed have at least 8 stalls minimum. Heck, I'm seeing a lot of tweets now whenever a supercharging station opens, it's actually now like 12 stalls. And yet Electrify America only does half to a third of that. That's terrible. And so because of that, there's a lot of CCS cars that often need to be charged, and it becomes a bit of a pain point when there's only 4 stalls. So to get everybody through the charging station faster, you really should be using the stalls that you can take advantage of. If the EVs that can take advantage of the 350 kilowatt chargers can get in there and charge up fast and get out, that opens those charging stations back up for another vehicle to come through. So that's why I'm explaining this. If you own a CCS car, know the maximum charging speed of your car and use the most appropriate charger. Try to pick the charging stall that gets as close to your maximum charging speed possible. But seriously, do pay attention to that because it drives a lot of EV drivers nuts when they can't get their 350s because they're being clogged up by a Chevy Bolt owner who doesn't know this. So do share that info with them as well. I know this is a long video, and that's because unlike the AC charging video I did, DC charging is much more complicated because due to the way that you have to set these up, they're typically not in private properties, so you're not usually DC charging your car at home. And these are found at public charging stations. And when they're being used, they're supposed to be used by people who are in a hurry. So here's another piece of advice for you. Because Electrify America stations are mostly at Walmarts per se, if you go to Walmart and they happen to have an Electrify America station and you're driving an EV, don't charge your car at the Electrify America station. Why? You're only shopping at Walmart. You have your own charger at home. Save the stalls for people who are on road trips and actually need those stalls. Even though, sure, a lot of vehicles are offering free 3 years of Electrify America or whatever their offering is per se, I really hate that because it is encouraging very bad behavior because these EV owners who drive CCS cars, they can charge at home, but the thing is they're still paying for it and they want to take advantage of the free charging they get when they buy the car. And the only way to get that is if you go to Walmart at the Electrify America station, and it's just rude. It's incentivizing the wrong type of behavior. If you happen to have a Walmart in your area with an Electrify America station, or if there's a DC fast charging station in your area in general, don't use it unless you actually happen to be on a road trip and you're passing through your town to get to somewhere else. But yeah, seriously, don't use those stations. Save them for people who are actually really in a dire pinch or who are on road trips. They need it way more than you do, even if it's free. If you want to use that free Electrify America charging, take a road trip. That's how you're supposed to use it. But yeah, tip for auto automakers as well. Don't incentivize that. That is encouraging very bad behavior, and it's driving a lot of people who are on road trips nuts, because the people who live in those towns that are using the stations, that's not nice. All right, enough rambling about that. I've done enough rambling about DC charging. I'm tired, and I've got other videos I need to film. So thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is DeWolf, Random Alpha, signing out.